the founder and CEO of Women Get On Board. We are a member-based company that connects, promotes, and empowers women to corporate boards. We have over 1,000 members across Canada with diversity in our Women Get On Board membership. Our goal is to get more women on boards. I want to begin today by acknowledging the land in which I live is in the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee. The Upper Canada Treaties cover this territory and are within the protected by the dish with one spoon, the Wampum Agreement, and are directly adjacent to the Haudenosaunee Treaty territory. Today, this area is home to many Indigenous people, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to enjoy the natural surroundings of this territory. I encourage all of us to actively become involved in understanding land acknowledgements and why they are essential for understanding Indigenous histories and contemporary Indigenous issues in Canada. Welcome. Women Get On Board is delighted to be hosting our virtual Women Get On Board Speaker Series this evening. And we want to thank her sponsors, the Femina Collective and ACE LLC Consulting. So we have a very exciting session ahead of us. As you've all signed up, we are going to talk about Mythbusters, the common myths of serving on a board. And I'm sure we've all touched on some of the conversations we're going to have, but I'm super excited. We've got Michelle Ashby, who is the CEO and founder of ACE LLC. We were just chatting in advance of the call today, and Women Get On Board is going to be celebrating our 10th anniversary, and Michelle is going to be celebrating 8 years. And so, our mutual goal is to get more women on boards, and Michelle will speak more about that. So thank you, Michelle, for joining us. As I said, I'm founder and CEO of Women Get On Board, Deborah Rosati. Super excited to be here and collaborating with both Michelle and Beth Borody, who is the founder and CEO of the Femina Collective. So I'm going to turn it over to Beth. Beth is going to moderate our very insightful and passionate conversations. And I promise, Beth, there'll be no dueling or sparring in the ring, okay?
Maybe that would make it more interesting. Who knows?
And there's not going to be a punching match either.
No. Yes, for those of you who are joining, I'm in the midst of a boxing fundraiser and I'm in the midst of training. So I was filling both Deborah and Michelle in on how that's going. But I'm so excited to be here this evening with all of you. And I'm so glad that Deborah and Michelle reached out to me to moderate this conversation, because these are two women that I greatly admire and have had a lot of respect for when I started my own understanding of what it took to get on a board, and actually debunked a lot of these myths through conversations that I've had. And so first, Deborah, I want to say that this was the first time I heard you say over 1,000 members in your introduction, which is so exciting and such a testament to what you have built with Women Get On Board. And I have to just say that, Michelle, your course and going through your course really changed my understanding of what it took to be on a board. It really broke things down in a really great way. And I remember the first conversation you and I had about what it meant to sit on a board, and you just were able to explain it in such a way that it made it understandable to me, and it made it digestible to me. And so I think with that, there's going to be a lot of those similar myths that are going to be debunked for a lot of the people on this call as well. So because I was just saying that, Michelle, I would love for you to share a bit more about what you do at ACE LLC and how you get more women on boards and what kind of led you to getting into this work.
Absolutely. Thank you, Beth. And thank you, Deborah. This is an amazing collaboration between all of us, and welcome to everyone who's here today. A little bit about my background. I have an extensive corporate background in finance and mining. And for 30 years, I was almost always the only woman in the room. And my male mentors are the ones who really elevated me, helped me to become successful, taught me what I know. And I followed my male mentors and watched them, climb the corporate ladder, get on 3 or 4 boards, retire out. They're making 6 figures. and they have time for family and all that kind of stuff, which seemed totally foreign to me, to have time for anything other than all the stuff that's on our list. And that's where I was headed in 2016. I was on 2 boards looking for a couple more. And that's when I recognized that there weren't very many women on boards in any industry around me. And I was really curious about why not, and started interviewing women. I spent 18 months, talked to 200 women. And that's when I realized that there are some amazing super women out there who are qualified to get on boards, but they don't know that they don't know how to get on, they don't know what to do, all those kinds of things. And so that's when I launched the program of the ACE board certification for women and opened up Pandora's box. And I share everything I've learned and I've been taught and what my experiences are in a program that gives that, 30 years of mentorship that I had from these guys in a very compact kind of time frame, number one, because who has time for like a really long program? And I just am really open. I'm an open book. So if we have any other questions today, I feel free and I will do my best. Hopefully that gives you a good sense, Beth.
No, that's great. And I will say that back in 2023, I think the end of 2023, we had a cohort of our members at Femina Collective go through the ACE program. And when we were talking with Michelle, there was a lot of that uncertainty of, is this course right for me? And am I ready to join a board, or should I even be looking at this? And every time that question came up, I remember you saying, yes, join the course. This is for you, which I think really brings us to one of the biggest myths. And I think the first myth I want to address with both of you is the idea that you have to have held a C-suite position, you have to have been a CEO, you have to be close to retirement in order to access these board opportunities. So maybe Deborah, I'll put it to you first about what your thoughts are around needing to have all of that experience before you step onto a board.
Well, you step back and you go, good governance is diversity of thought, right? And diversity of thought means people come to the boardroom in leadership roles that are not just CEOs, diverse in age and ethnicity and gender and geographic and expertise. And so the past that Michelle was talking about, which was very much what I grew up in, only woman, tech, executive, around the boardroom table, was that it was always the myth. It was your friends. It was the CEOs you knew, the guys knew each other from the golf course, and you just bring them in. And, so as it's evolving, when you think about diversity on a board and the board skill matrix of what do you need to build out a board and to make it effective, is you need a variety of skills and expertise. So you can't have all CEOs or CPAs. A lot of people say to me, oh, you're a CPA. Oh, no problem getting on a board. It's only CPAs that get on boards. And I'm like, au contraire, because could you imagine a board made of accountants? How non-diverse would that be? And we'd all be thinking the same way. So that diversity of thought is so important. And you can have one person that has CEO experience, and that's great. But not everybody is going to be a CEO. And I mean, if you look at the population and you take the data from last year, OSLARS does a diversity disclosure report every year. Less than, I think it was about 8.8% of TSX listed companies were led by women. So if all of a sudden you only have that percentage and then it whittles down, that means that there aren't a lot of women to pull from that have CEO experiences, but they've got a multitude of different experiences. So I think it's a myth that needs to be broken. And I think that if anyone is serving as chair of a nominating corporate governance committee, chair of a board, we can all rally together and push back and go. And even, Beth, I know you lead in the mining industry, and so do you, Michelle, but everyone's like, oh, they have to have mining experience. Well, sometimes you need different industry experiences. So mine is, I'd push back because you cannot have a board just made up of CEOs.
I have something to add to that. You did point out that there's so few women who are actually in the CEO role that's one of the maybe barriers to entry. And what I would say is that as women, very typically, we didn't get the title and we didn't get the compensation of our male counterparts. So it's no surprise that we have a much lower percentage of women who are CEOs. Having said that, there are many women who have managed large projects or large numbers of personnel, or saved, on expenses for a company that's significant or a specific project. And their male counterpart, again, got the title and got the bigger compensation and a lot of the credit, while the female got the work and did the same, if not better. So I always look at that really closely when I'm working with women one-on-one. And the other thing is, if you're a business owner, you are a CEO. And don't, you might be shy, like, oh, I can't call myself a CEO. If you were a guy, you would call yourself a CEO the second you started your business. So you can give yourself permission to do that. And that also raises our thing. Now, Deborah, one of the things I wanted to bring up too is that when we do run our business, we have experiences in lots of different areas. So that also is really valuable. So when we're hiring and firing and marketing and branding and, all the things that need to happen. So we actually have a lot of those skills and experiences, yet we don't claim them. And so I also like to bring that up.
Yeah, and sort of a follow on it. Beth, we'll get to the other questions in a moment, but this is a meaty one that we're passionate about.
I was going to add to it as well, so let's keep going. Yep.
Okay, well, I'll do, and then you please do. But I would say that point is that, we always kind of, that imposter syndrome. Oh, we're not good enough. We haven't done that. But at the end of the day, if you've led a P&L, you've managed, you've done major restructuring, you've done transformation. I know I got asked to serve on a departmental audit committee meeting, board or committee, and they said, well, you've done transformation. And I kind of turned to them and I said, I have. And so I started adopting that into my language, so be mindful of what others say. They'll say something to you, you're like, oh, I hadn't thought of it. And if you have global experience, you have multiple languages, different and different certifications. So you can elevate yourself, but it has to tie back to what is the value that you bring to a board and what is the board looking for. So over to you, Beth.
I was going to say with Michelle, when I went through your course back in 2023, that's when I started using the title of CEO for Femina Collective. I always said founder, and I never put in CEO as well. And it is true, just the different way that frames it for people who then interact with me, and the way the conversation flows is very different when that role comes up. And so I just wanted to really echo that point. And I think you've both touched on this piece of diversity and the talent needed in a governance structure. And you don't want to have everyone thinking the same way. And traditionally, particularly when we've looked at public boards or we've looked at boards of private companies, we have this picture in our heads of it being very white, old. They are all of the accountants. They all have a finance background. They're all buddies from the golf course, but we know the world is changing, and we know the talents, and we know the way that corporate Canada is really shifting at the moment, and corporate America too, is needing different skill sets. So you've talked about that diversity of thought, and I'm wondering if you can dive into it a little bit more about some of the skill sets that you both are seeing that are really starting to come up more and more in board needs, outside of just your typical, board chair, secretary, treasurer, that sort of thing. What are the other skills that boards are really looking for to round out their governance model? And I'll start with you, Michelle, this time.
To be honest with you, I have been on a public company board since 2005. And I've seen a lot. I'm in mining, so they have a saying, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And I think the newest that I've seen in that time frame has been adding in the ESG, which can be called safety, health, and environment. They haven't used the ESG, the boards that I've been on. And I just want to reiterate that when we go around the table and we're looking for the matrix, we actually will use consultants for things like cyber, as opposed to bringing in a director who's an expert on that, or in crypto or any of those kinds of things. We are still very traditional, and we want to have a balance of people who are really good at corporate finance, M&A, technology, the technical side of things, so that we have both that we can manage. And then CEOs or COOs, people that are in the industry who have hands-on experience, sometimes in the same types of regions of the world that we may have our projects, or it may be the type of project that we're looking at. So those are the conversations that I'm used to. I don't know what Deborah has experience in, but that's kind of how I've experienced it in real life.
So mine coming into public company boards was 2007. I'd been on private company boards in the tech sector. And one of the things that I was being brought into was because I had technology background, not a technologist. And I've taken companies from early stage right to exits, and I was in venture capital. And so when I was being asked to join a board, it was these companies were going through these major growth strategies. They were going through financing strategies, they were going through acquisition, like M&A, and I had had those different experiences, and it was in outside of technology. And the one example I would give is it was 2017, and I was being asked to join in Canada. The cannabis industry was just coming to in the process of regulating, and it was in 2018, and I was asked to join a public company board, a company in the cannabis sector that was just going public. And they were very clear, they want somebody who had public company experience, somebody who could chair an audit committee, and somebody who had a lot of governance background. And so it was kind of introduced to me that way. And so got to go into a whole new industry. And Michelle, they had health and safety committees, you can imagine, with cultivation and all of that before ESG formation. And so for me, it was this trend to be able to have skills that you brought over from a different industry, but competencies that you could bring to a board. And it was part of that skill matrix. So when I think about it, I think, and then just being really mindful of, what is that value that you bring? So if you have public company experience, you want to lean in. If you have transactional M&A restructuring, those are all really valuable skill sets, but it has to be for the right board in the right time. Not all companies face that, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think, and I apologize. I had like a tickle in my throat that just took over there for a moment. So I apologize for that. But I think, Deborah, you're speaking to a really good point right now with the thought of what type of experience you need to come onto a board. Sorry. And a lot of the time, people think that you need to have that nonprofit experience coming on. And so I want to pass it back to you about how you feel about that for nonprofit board experience before going on to either a private or a public board.
Maybe I'll lean in on that. Because I think as women, what I would say to you, not-for-profit experience is great, but it's not the only way to get on a board. And what I find a lot of women do, they fill up their portfolio with a lot of not-for-profit roles. Not-for-profit here, not-for-profit there. And that is wonderful. But at the same time, people only look at you and go, but wait a sec, you're only on not-for-profit boards. And so what I would be very deliberate, I actually was on corporate boards before I was on not-for-profit boards. I'd be very deliberate as to make sure if you are considering a not-for-profit, it's something that you really care about. You know your exit strategy. So how long are you going to be on there? And also when you come off, you should be in a leadership role. You should either be chair of the board, a vice chair, or chair of a committee. Rather than diluting and going into a multitude of different not-for-profits, really lean in on the one that you're there and really get that leadership experience. So I think not-for-profit is great. I think a lot of women feel like that's their path to board work. I think it is complementary, and you have to be really deliberate how you show up.
Michelle, anything to add?
Mm-hmm.
Just a few things. Yeah.
For those of you who know me, I'm a contrarian here. And I'm also like, I've also broken all the things I'm going to tell you. So I tell people to get off of nonprofits and the things that you love, the passions that you have, write a check. So if we look at it from a gender standpoint, we know that, let's just pick a number. Around 20% of all the publicly traded companies around the world are women, and 80% are men on the boards. And if we were able to get the stats, because they're not really out there, for nonprofits, it's about the opposite. It would be 10 to 20% are male and 80 to 90% are women. And so what I say is, like, let's give the guys the free work and we'll take the paying ones, okay? So we'll just flip places. The other thing is, as Deborah brought up, when you have nonprofit on your board resume, if you have a lot of them, whoever the reader is going to say, number one, she works for free. And number two, she's overboarded. Whether it's they're getting paid or not, their conscious mind is going to say, she's already committed. Now, having said that, I work with lots of women who have nonprofit board experience. And as Deborah said, be selective. If you're going to sit on a big board like United Way and everyone else on the board are titans of the industry, they are people who can get you on a board. That's a great network. And so be strategic about doing that and then use it. Like, don't just go to the meeting. Make sure you organize coffees with each one of these people and have them get to know you. It isn't always just about you getting to know them. You want to become memorable and valuable so that they think of you when an opportunity comes forward. So that's another thing. And then here's where I broke my own rule. I joined the industry trade. It's a nonprofit board for the Mining Hall of Fame in the United States. Strategically, because it was made up of a lot of gentlemen I didn't know. And I felt like it was a good network for the ladies that I have in ACE and giving more opportunities for board openings. And I was right. Like the second I signed up, the chair of the board got in touch with me and said, listen, we're looking for 2 independent directors on our private company. Can you send me some? And so I did. So it worked that way. So there always are those exceptions to the rule. And the important thing is to be strategic. And as women, we have limited time. We are committed to way more than men are overall. And what do you want that time? If you were to take a nonprofit commitment off your calendar, that open space could be the space you could be committing to getting yourself on a paid board. 1 hour a week, 2 hours a week, working on your resume, doing networking events, whatever the case may be. This is a job to get yourself on a board. It isn't just going to happen. You have to have an intention, you have to be ready, and you have to do it.
Yeah. I think
So
you're so right on that piece where we often are seen as the ones to just take on nonprofit work because we are women. And I saw a couple hand clap reactions when you said we need to get paid for the work that we're doing, because it's so true. We shouldn't just be seen as givers and as people who take on that extra work. And so I really like that thought about being strategic. I also think one of the things that both of you do very, very well, and I've learned from both of you, and I know, Michelle, it's covered in your course as well, is the idea of networking, and that idea of how you network and how you speak with people and being really intentional about that, particularly when it comes to board roles. Because with board roles, we already have gone through kind of systemically why they are difficult for us to achieve, because there are fewer of us, because of the experience, because of traditions, systems, all of that. And so those networking pieces become really crucial so that you have people who are putting your names forward. But I think with this kind of uptake and people really wanting to get on boards, women realizing I can get on a board, there is often this illusion that when I say I want to get on a board, next week I'm going to be on a board, and people get really excited about that and they really want to jump for that, and they don't realize the time that it takes and the effort that it takes to actually get on a board. And how that can differ for industries, for positions, for whatever it may be. And so when you have women come to you in both of your organizations saying, well, I joined last month and I'm not on a board yet, what am I doing wrong? What is your response to them? And Deborah, I'll start with you.
Great conversations. What I would say, it's a long process. You got to stay in it. I just had a conversation with one of our members last week. She was prepping for a board interview, and she has been deliberate. She's left her executive position about a year and a half ago, and she's finally, in this last sort of 18 months to 2 years, finally she's being approached. But 2 years ago, she was knocking on the doors of executive recruiters. She was knocking in the door. She kept putting in her submission, and one kind of board opportunity begets another. And so they don't necessarily come to you, and less than 15%, and Michelle, I know you've got some data, less than 15% of board opportunities actually go through recruiters, okay? So you've got 85% or 80% that are network, right? And so it could be people that you've worked with before. A lot of my opportunities have either come through the accounting or the law firms. They've seen me around the boardroom table. They'll reach out. They trust you. They've seen your work. But I would say that you got to be deliberate, and you can't just expect people to be knocking on your door. And like, to me, I'm big on LinkedIn. I'm out there on socials. What are you saying? And Michelle, I know you've got weekly, you show up with your messaging and what's top of mind, and people will see you out there. But I always say is like, what are you doing as an individual for people to want to connect? And how are you showing up, right? You know, if you're always asking, how are you giving back as well? So I always think that networking is a two-way street. It has to be reciprocal, but you have to be really deliberate, and you have to be patient. Persistence, persistence, persistence. That's what I would say. And it doesn't happen overnight.
I think, Michelle, just before I go to you, one of the pieces that I'll say on that with networking that I often share with our members as well is understand the type of networking that you like to do and then put yourself in those rooms. I personally, I am terrible when I'm just put into a big room with people I don't know and I'm told to go and network and go and connect with people. It's not my way to do it, but you give me LinkedIn, you give me a couple people who I know that I want to connect with, I can find them, I can get a coffee with them, I can send a note out, because that one-on-one is much easier for me. And so my network is built doing that, where others I know are fantastic at going into rooms of people, being able to kind of spot who they need to talk to and going and introducing themselves. And so I think we often get overwhelmed with that feeling of networking and how do we network and who do we network with? And networking can be done in very different ways. And it's find that way that makes sense for you and understand who you're trying to network with and why you're trying to network with them. And you can do that in various different ways. So Michelle, I would love to hear your thoughts on this as well.
Well, Beth, what you just said is really important, because you have a self-awareness around what works for you, and you figured that out. And sometimes it takes some experimenting of where you feel most comfortable with. And also you may need to get to access to someone in a situation that you're not comfortable with, but you know that, and you can kind of prepare yourself mentally as you go in. But I love how you identified, like, I know what I'm really good at and I know how to get there, and you're willing to make the effort in order to follow through and get that scheduled. And that's the key, is to follow through and to get that scheduled. And what I will tell you is, since I've been teaching women, I've had the most unusual experiences myself in getting on boards and the experiences on board. And I'm really convinced that the universe has me going through all these things in order to share with other women. I would never tell someone that you would get invited to a board the first 15 minutes that you met someone. And yet it happened to me. I went to a conference, I saw a booth that looked interesting. I went up and started talking to the lady in the booth. I didn't know the CEO was standing behind the backdrop, and he overheard our conversation, came out, introduced himself. We started chatting, and literally within 15 minutes, he said, I've been looking for someone like you to sit on my board. We're going public in 2 months. Would you be interested? Don't answer me right now. Could we meet tomorrow? I'll bring my partner. And I met with them. I got on the board. I went through the IPO with them and was on the board for a couple of years. And it was just another lesson of, you never know. And I can tell you that as I've taught cohorts of women, almost every single time, there's one person who will be tapped for a board because they told someone, I just signed up to take this board certification class. And they're like, oh, you'd be a great board director. Can we talk? You know? So, and other women that I've trained years ago are still not on a board and are looking. There's no set answer. And as Deborah said, you have to be persistent. You have to be persistent. You have to be persistent. And when you talk to your champions and you let them know you're looking for a board, remember that you're not the only thing on their mind. They think more about themselves than they do about us, unfortunately. And in that case, you need to remind them every couple of months, like, hey, just touching base, anything come up that you can, you know, connect me with, whatever, if they're not being active. And you just keep just keep digging, just keep going. And when you get those no's, even when you go through interviews and you're not the one that's picked, trust me, I've been second or third many times. It happens. You move on. You're like, okay, that one wasn't meant to be. That's not the right one for me. Another one's coming.
I think as women, we need to know that we can have that confidence to ask for what we want. And we don't have to wait for a handout, or we don't have to kind of please and thank you our way through something. We can go after what we want. And I think one of the things within that networking and those reminders is also being really good at knowing what you're good at. What are you bringing to the table, so that when someone asks you, you have that answer right away for what you can bring, what your value is to that board. Because if you don't know that and you don't feel confident in your skill sets that you're bringing, they're going to see that right away. And so I think that with that networking and that permission to own that confidence and knowing what you're bringing to the table, those just make for a really great situation. And I know, so we have, Michelle, we have your course, which I think some people on this call have probably done. I have gone through, and Deborah, I know that you have also gone through many board certifications, and there's this whole debate right now out there, particularly around women, is what is the value of these certifications? Should we go through them? Are they worthwhile? Are people just getting opportunities on the golf course, or what is the purpose? And so, Deborah, I'm going to give this to you because I know that you've gone through a few of them yourself for various reasons, to kind of talk through your rationale for why they were important for you and how they benefited you over the years.
Well, overarching, I'm a lifelong learner. So learning is key, knowledge is power. I took the Institute of Corporate Directors back in 2007, 2008. I'd already been serving on private company boards for 6-7 years already. So it wasn't like I was new to board work. I got sponsored by one of my boards to go to, so I didn't have to pay for it. But when I did take it, what I found, it really gave me some really great governance frameworks to allow me to lead and serve with more courage and confidence in the boardroom. And I remember coming back to one of the public company boards I was on. It was all men, and I remember I was always being slotted into the audit committee, but I really wanted to go on the nominating corporate governance committee. And so I kind of put my hand up, they overlooked me, and I said to the chair of the nominating corporate governance committee, I'm interested in this. I'd like to be on this. I've just finished this governance certification, and this is really important to me. He looked over and said, sure, I didn't know, right? Like, I put my hand up, and governance has always been very important. So I think, I get asked that question all the time in our mentorship programs and any of our programs, anything we do, should I take one? You don't know how many times I'm a letter of reference on an annual basis for the ICD. I should get some royalties on that. But what I would say is, you go and you have to go for a reason. And it has to be, you're not going because I'm going to end up on a board. What it will do, it might come down to you and another candidate where they're looking, and you might have the great same skill sets, but you might have the governance certification. And that is an homage to say governance is important to you. And I do feel like if you're going to put the hours in training, you should be looking at some form. And I also have the competent boards, the global ESG program, and their climate change. So I took them, different timing, different reasons, but for always wanted to be, so I could lead and serve on boards as an effective director. I took it for my own knowledge. And I always say, get it paid for. If you get sponsorship, get your company pay for it. But they are important. And Michelle, I don't know how many women I have referred to your program. I think it's a phenomenal program. And so I'm gonna hats off to.
And right before Michelle, because there's a question that just came in, which will just, I think, really go nicely into what you're going to say, is what is the recommendation if you're an entrepreneur or you're someone who wants to get one of these certifications but don't have $25,000 for the ICD? How else can you go and get this training if you're not being corporately sponsored? And Michelle, I think I'll say your course is a great option because one, it doesn't have the same high level price tag, and you're still getting very quality education from it. But I would love for you to speak directly to it and what you've had over the last few years with your experience.
Okay, absolutely. Yeah. My program is within 8 weeks. If you take the online, it's 22 modules. You have 5 months to finish it, and you can get the certification, and it's a lot less expensive than the ICD, either the live class or the online. I just want to talk back up a little bit and just say there is no requirement to be certified. Okay. You know, to get on a board, you have to be over the age of 18 and not a felon. And then there's some other requirements that come in that are layered on top of that through the exchanges and the regulators. Why did I put a certification? And by the way, we have the first certification in the United States for anyone in 2018. There was nothing down here. ICD is way ahead. Canada is way ahead of us on the certification. I was at a cocktail party, and one of my male mentors, who I'd known for 20 years, was at the cocktail reception. I'm standing next to another lady, friend of mine who's on other boards as well. And I mentioned to him, I'm looking for a couple more boards. Do you have any ideas? This was back when I was looking for that number 3 and 4. And he said, Michelle, he goes, I think it'd be a great idea if you went and took the ICD and got your certification. Okay, and I'm like, I've been on boards for 11 years. You've known me forever. You've referred me for all these other things. This is my brain, right? And I said, oh, good idea. He walks away, and my girlfriend looked at me and said, I'll bet he never, she said an expletive, says that to men. And I said, you're dang right he doesn't. The beauty of this is that I have these close relationships with men. They feel so comfortable with me that there's no filter from their brain to their mouth. And that was a gift. And the gift was he told me that a certification was important for the males that are in the room and are making the decisions. And that's why I decided to put together a group of experts to create a certification for the ladies that I was going to train. I want to eliminate as many barriers to entry as possible. Just like Deborah. Deborah has these amazing mentor programs and all the, trainings. She has a lot of other trainings too that are all in the same light. We like to be learners, and we want to eliminate as many barriers to entry. Think of it in terms of boys raised to men are mentored through their whole lives. And this has been going on for centuries. We are not. And this is something that we're struggling to do. And Deborah and I are both like, hey, I'm going to share whatever it is I know to help any one of you to get there. And we're trying to do it as quickly as possible. We don't have a lifetime. We want it to happen now. So that's why we're like pushy, 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 pushy. And that's why I have a program that you do in 8 weeks, because I want you to be ready and out there and know what you're doing and have that executive vernacular and your board package and everything you need, including the certification. And I have had candidates who were selected because they had the certification and the other person did not. It can happen that way. Not always, but it can.
And I would echo by saying, having gone through again Michelle's program and thinking about my own board journey, it really speaks to Deborah, what you were talking about that lifelong learner. And I think being very eyes wide open of what your responsibilities are when you become a board member, particularly when you become a board member of a public company. It's not just kind of the next tick box, feather in your hat, whatever you want to say, that you get on and you just have to read a couple documents every quarter and be on your way. I think being able to do those courses just gives that very well-rounded understanding of those expectations. And so as a final question, before we kind of go into question and answer, a question that I'm just going to pose to both of you is what should you expect looking at that public board space? Because everyone wants a paid board experience. We want to get that on our resumes. What do you say for women who are going into those roles for what they should expect? How do they prepare? And what are kind of some of the key things that they need to know going into that first board meeting when they are going for that first quarter? Michelle, I'll hand it to you.
Oh my gosh. Well, take my class. That's a really big question.
Yeah.
It's a really big question. I want you to be confident and competent. And, and that on so many levels, like Deborah brought up, the imposter syndrome, we want you to feel comfortable. I know every time I join a new board, I get nervous. that first meeting, I'm like, they're looking at me. I know they want to hear, they're just as nervous as we are. Okay. So, take a breath, say something. Don't be just sitting there quiet through the whole thing. And again, if you have time, get to know more of the directors before you have that first meeting. Set up Zoom meetings with the committee. You can do it with the whole committee, or you can do it with each one at a time. If you're local, grab a coffee. As much of that as you can do is going to help you relax and them relax. Because it's a two-side, like Deborah said, it's a give and take. It isn't just about us. It's also about them. Trust me, they're nervous. You're the first woman in the room. They're like, oh gosh, what's this going to be like? They're afraid to make the wrong move, say the wrong thing, that kind of thing. So we want to put everybody at ease and get comfortable and do our job. That's it.
So Beth, I have a story that kind of will dovetail into, it's about doing your due diligence and knowing who you're going to be on the board, what's their financial situation, what's their growth strategy, on and on and on. I go to a board interview, it's 2015, it's a public company, and my first interview, and I got referred into a previous partner from Deloitte, and it was in retail, and I was on a retail public company board. I go in, I do all my due diligence, and I go in, and the CEO is just the CEO and he says to me, I'm not interviewing you because you're a woman. Here I am, that many years in my career, that's not what I was expecting for the beginning at start of an interview. So I thought, do I pick up my bag and say, thank you very much? And I said, my inner voice was no. So I was like, I prepared too much for this interview. So I just said, well, listen, I'm here because I can add value to your board. Let's talk about your strategy. And I had a 2-hour strategy conversation with him. But I knew in my heart of hearts, it was intergenerational. It was always men on the board. And it was a retailer. 80% of their purchases were coming from women. They really could have had value with a woman on the board. I chose not to pursue it because I knew it would not be the right culture. I could check the boxes. I could take it on. Trust me, I was really well prepared. But at the end of the day, I knew that it would not be the right fit for me. And so I just bowed out. I didn't pursue it any further. So I give that example because sometimes it's better to know up front and it is a lot harder to get off a board than it is sometimes to get on a board.
Well, and what a great example as well of being able to still be in control of the decisions that you make. And that you are also interviewing as much as you are being interviewed. And so making sure that there is that fit is crucial, both for you and for the company as well. So that's a really powerful example to be able to give. I think looking at some of the conversation that's happening in the chat, there are a couple questions. One, just going back to that idea of that certification, and Michelle, you talked about it, about how certification is not mandated. It's not required. And so I would love to circle back to those ideas of just from both of you, your top 2 things outside of certifications. What are the top 2 things you think women should be doing in order to get on board? So Deborah, your top 2, and then Michelle, yours.
Oh, thanks for putting me first. My top 2 are be prepared, over-prepare. So that when you go into that board interview, you've read the notes to the financial statements and you can ask the CEO, when are they spinning off the healthcare division? Because in that segmented information, note disclosure, it was quite obvious they needed to be, so be more prepared than anyone else. And then be passionate about why you're there and what you can bring.
Michelle.
I think one thing, kind of backing up a little bit, is to be really clear about what you want. Understand what you're going to ask for in regards to what size company, what's the industry, what's your ideal board, and does this company have those characteristics? So like with Deborah, when she figured out that wasn't a match, you can pretty quickly tell whether or not it's going to be a good fit for you. And everything that Deborah said, absolutely true. Be prepared for that first interview it can be very casual. I have women who get super prepared. They like nerded themselves out, and then they do that first interview and it's very get to know you kind of thing. So be prepared for that too. Because the history of the boardroom is all about collegiality and trust. They want to trust you. Are you going to behave right? Are you going to be on their side? I mean, you know, we all talk about it. Have to have diversity of thought at the table. All true. I'm not saying that's not true. At the same time, if you're too antagonistic to what they are doing or what they want to accomplish, you're not going to get picked. And that might be okay. If you really want it, you're going to have to play a different role though, and get yourself so they really like you, and then they'll pick you.
I think as well, that's a good piece just to pick up on in there, is that those informal interviews sometimes are even more important than those very structured ones. And those informal interviews are not a moment to let yourself just go and share your whole life story because it feels like you're just with friends for coffee. It very much is recognizing what's kind of happening, what the energy is, and recognizing those cues that they're giving you without dropping everything and thinking that you're talking to your best friend in those situations, because they are taking notes.
Yeah, beautiful point. And when we're talking to men, they love to talk about themselves. It's really good to get them to start to talk like, what keeps you up at night? What are you really worried about? You know, what are the challenges? And if you're I have a very creative mind. And when I get into those conversations, I'm like, oh, wow, well, you know, have you guys ever thought about this idea or that idea? And you start in a conversation. I had lunch with a CEO a couple of years ago. And literally within 45 minutes, he said, I didn't mean for this to be a board interview, but would you consider sitting on my board? And it was really just because of that kind of a conversation, which was casual yet intentional.
Another question that came that someone sent directly to me was looking at when you have very specific skill set that may seem a bit odd. So taking mining in particular, because Michelle, I know you work in mining, when you don't have a traditional mining role, you're one of the engineers, you're the CPA, you're the CFO, you're whatever it may be, but you have kind of outlying skills that are used. How would you recommend that people pitch those skills within either their board resume, or how do you frame that when it's not necessarily as obvious as be something as a CPA or something like that? So if you don't have those credentials or that traditional background, how do you set yourself up for success?
Well, if this is a company that comes to you, they've identified you as really good at what you do, and there's something about you that they want. And I think it's more than just like, oh, my buddy Joe said you'd be great on our board, and so I want to talk to you. Sometimes that happens, but I think you want to be very clear, like Deborah said before, in telling them, why you're excited to be a part of that. And again, there's some place where you're touching. You may not be directly in the company in the industry, but you may be a very important part of a business overall, and how those businesses survive, right? So it could be technology, can be applied to anything. Okay. So there are things like that. And obviously we are specialists in, if we're auditors, we usually have a specific industry that we're really good at, and that will be where we would naturally land. At the same time, if you're creative and you think, oh my gosh, I think my skills would be really well suited for the fashion industry, how do you position yourself there? And you've got to articulate it. You are the one that has to sell it. This is why I think I bring value to you. So you've got to really work on that.
Deborah, anything to add on that?
I think what I would say is your value that you bring to a board evolves over time. And I give the example was I'd always be tapped on the shoulder to be chair of an audit committee of a public company. The last public company I was on, we did the AGM, we were determining, and they were just forming a nominating corporate governance committee. And I put my hand up. Somebody asked the question is, what does a nominating corporate governance? And I'm new to this board. Okay. And I kind of look around, we're on Zoom, and I'm like, I'm going to take this. And then I said, oh, by the way, that's the committee I want to chair, because I also knew that there was another CPA. He'd been on longer. He could chair the audit committee. And so what I really have done is I don't want to chair an audit committee anymore. I'm more than happy to recommend other women. And so don't get complacent in one role and be defined by it. Always be evolving. And now I chair, a startup company. I'm chair of that board. So, it's an evolution. Don't be defined by your past, put it out there on what your desires are, because it's a continuation.
And Michelle, I have a question for you that just came on that you touched on a little bit earlier, but it says, I would like your opinion on how an entrepreneur who has run their business for 30 plus years can be seen at the level of a C-suite person, because we have done it all. So how would you, what is your advice to that person for setting themselves up?
Well, as I mentioned before, if you're a business owner, you're a CEO and you have done it all. So it's really about, identifying what those accomplishments are and being really good at articulating that. Did you build a multi-million-dollar business in your industry? Did you work with major corporations that are well-known names in the industry? Because that brings credibility. So it's really about building credibility around what you've built and not being so insular, but looking at it from a broader perspective, and how other people will, again, find that place where they're checking boxes of, oh, like, she's impressive. She's accomplished a lot. She's worked with people that I know, or she's worked with major corporations that I want access to. Maybe that's one of the reasons we want to put her on the board. It's because she has a client that we want to get in touch with, So, if they're being strategic in their thought process, they may look at it from that standpoint.
I
So
also think there's something to be said about really owning what you have built. Again, as women, we don't celebrate our accomplishments or acknowledge our accomplishments for as big as what they are, or what they are seen to other people. So really making sure that you look at your business and you give it the credit where credit's due for what you have been able to build with that.
And so,
Deborah?
Beth, what I would say, and sort of a follow on to that response from Michelle, is be mindful. If you've never been on a public company, you've never been management of a public company, it's kind of hard to come in as an entrepreneur of a public company. It might be the company's going to be growing too. Like you said, Michelle, you went on a board, it was, it's going to do an IPO. So I think you have to think about where you're coming off of as a starting point to where you're going to begin. And I would also say is what I've seen time and time again, because we post out board opportunities every 2 weeks. Last year, we've got my team here that does that work. We posted 290 board opportunities to our members, of which 40% were paid. So it's up to our members to go and look. But what I would tell you is, if you're reviewing these board postings, make sure that if the first thing that they're looking for is a CPA, you're not going to apply for that if you're not a CPA. If they want global experience and you don't have global experience, or if they want you to be bilingual and you're only English speaking, there are a few requirements that they look for. And if they definitely want a governance certification and you don't have it. So it's very competitive to get on paid boards. So when you're looking at these postings, you may not have 100% of what they're looking for, but be realistic of what they are looking for, and understand it's always they're looking to the future of where the company's going, not where the company's been. And so I've seen we've done board shortlist services, and I've seen board resumes come in and they didn't answer, like did not have the requirements. And guess what? That took time of mine to go through that. So just be mindful when you're putting it forward. You want to stretch, but you want to make sure you're within the range of what the board is looking for.
Absolutely. I think we are just rounding up for time, but I do want to say that, Michelle, there was a shout out for you and your course from Corinne Boone, who is here on the call, saying she can personally vouch for Michelle's course, and a couple people agreeing with that. I will say, as being a member of Women Get On Board, those emails that come out every 2 weeks are incredibly helpful when you see all of those board opportunities, as well as taking Michelle's course a couple years ago. These women have been absolutely instrumental in my understanding of what it takes to be on a board, and just that continuous learning piece as well. And so, Deborah, again, thank you so much for inviting me, and Michelle, thank you for having such a wholesome conversation here. Deborah, I will give it back to you to wrap us up for the last few minutes.
Well, thank you, Beth. Thank you, Michelle. We want to thank you both, and we want to donate to our charity partner for your time and your insights today. Our charity partner is Cheekbone Beauty, and they have an Indigenous Scholarship Fund. So we will be making a donation on your behalf. We also want to thank the Femina Collective and ACE LLC, which stands for Michelle Ashby and Beth Borody, for sponsoring us today. And then just to let everybody know, the recording will come out in a few days. You'll get that. There'll be a thank you follow-up. We really appreciate getting feedback in our survey so we can share with Beth and Michelle, aside from the accolades in the chat. Just wanted to let everyone know our next speaker series is June 18th. It will be on executive compensation, aligning pay with strategy. Southlead Group is our sponsor. So just wanted to say thank you so much for joining us this evening. And I am going to give the floor back to Beth because she's going to talk about PDAC next week and how you show up.
Yes. So for anyone who will be joining us at the Prospector Developer and Association of Canada conference next week in Toronto on the 4th, which I believe is Tuesday at 2:30 p.m., we are asking all women to show up in your most colorful, bright, anything but navy blue and black suits or work clothing so that we can show the power that women have in the mining industry. I think if you have been to this conference or any of these conferences, you have seen the escalators filled with men who are wearing black and blue suits, and you have often wondered, where the heck are the women? And so we are looking forward to having some fun together and gathering all the women at the convention center at 2:30 on March 4th in whatever color you want to bring, and just having a good time together. So if anyone is there, please, please, please join us, and you can find more information on LinkedIn at the Femina Collective.
Is there a space that you're going to meet in particular, Beth?
Yes, we will be meeting in the hallway between the north and south buildings.
Okay.
So we will meet right there, and then we'll do some photos on the escalators going down into the convention center.
I can't wait to see it on LinkedIn.
I know that's going to be
I can't wait to be there. It'll be
fantastic.
a great time. So I'm very excited. So thank you, Deborah, for letting me plug that as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Beth. And thank you to my team, Keisha and Laura, who are on this call. We usually do them at noon. So I think hopefully they've both done Uber Eats for dinner tonight. So thank you all. Thank you for those who joined us. Have a good evening and be warm and be well.
Thanks, everybody. It was great.